So welcome everyone to our event on the couch. And today's discussion is product management in a customer-centric world. So we're very pleased to be able to bring to you today some expertise to discuss that. What we're looking at is the concept that product management has really moved into the age of customer centricity. And that's certainly influencing the way products are designed and developed. My name is Dr. Kevin Argus. I'm from RMIT University. I'm the Program Director for the Graduate School of Business and Law across 3 programs: the MBA program, the Graduate Certificate of Product Management, and the Graduate Certificate of Customer Success Management. So just before we start, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, which we do always here at RMIT. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So I'd love to introduce you to our panel. Today, we're very fortunate to have 2 guests with extensive experience in product management. We've got Narelle Charity, who is Director of Product at Seek, and we've got Ed Bobeff, who is Product Management Executive and former Executive General Manager at Xero. And they're going to discuss with us product management in a customer-centric world. Just a bit of housekeeping. So the aim is to be somewhat interactive, particularly at the end of the discussion. We're going to be inviting you to post questions as the conversation ensures, and we will address some of those questions, time permitting, in the final 10 minutes. There was a call out for questions at the sign of registration, and that has informed the discussion that we're having today. When you post your questions, make sure you post them to everyone so that everyone can see the questions. Throughout, we'll also have a couple of polls, and that's a way to get your sense test on how some of these questions are impacting the context that you're involved in your workplace. So what we'll do, we'll start off with the opening question, and it's an opportunity to hear also a brief introduction from our guest panelists. So when we look at product management, it's certainly an ever-evolving role. And in the early days of product development, the focus was very much on engineering and manufacturing, and less on things like user experience. Now, today, we're very much living in the age of the customer. So what does that mean for the role that in previous years was so focused on just the life cycle of the product? I'll hand over to you, Narelle.
Thanks, Kevin. This is a great topic. So a bit of an intro about myself. I've been doing product management for longer than I'd like to admit, to be frank, and started in product at Telstra back in the year 2000, and have done product roles across Telstra, ANZ, AGL, and now head up the product function at Seek, which I absolutely love doing. I think having worked in product for a very long time, I've seen the evolution of customer engagement and customer empathy really shift. And I'd say in the early days of my product tenure, technology and vendors would kind of come up with a solution that we would force fit into the market. And I've seen a massive shift in the desire to actually fulfill a customer's needs. And it sounds really simple, but it's just not how it worked at the start of my tenure in product management. And I remember, fortunately, it was quite a long time ago, I had a massive mental shift where I'd gone from being very certain on what I thought the customer needed and how our solution would match those needs, to knowing that I shouldn't make any assumptions and that I should always test. And we did that through my first experience of design thinking, where we just went out and spoke to customers about very broad needs. I'd have to say it was pretty humbling, as I got to this point where I was no longer certain that the solutions that I had for customers in my mind were right. But it's actually really right to be humble as a PM, and really healthy as a product manager to really make sure that you're always questioning what you think the customer needs, and you're always going back to the customer. it teaches you that empathy for the customer is absolutely critical in how you build and develop products. I think it's pretty easy as a product manager, and this happens at all levels of product, from the exec level right down to somebody starting out, to get really enthralled with the idea of what you're developing and the idea that you've got. And it's really critical that you don't lose track of the customer as you build a product. So a big part of a PM's role is to go back to the customer and check that what you're doing is really meeting the need. And also just measuring and using data to inform that. So both using the enormous toolkit that a product manager has at their disposal, which would be a blend of, getting customer empathy through both data and soft skills. So when I talk about data and hard data, it's things like A/B testing a solution, really understanding, if a customer behaves in one way or another when you present them different options. It's great doing that in a digital environment. We can really do that at pace. But also doing quantitative research when you may not be able to test something. And then the softer skills are things like design thinking, qualitative research, focus groups, interviews, those sorts of things. And both of those combined are really amazing, and they help you, when used correctly, get underneath the problem you're trying to solve for the customers. So I've seen a massive shift from force-fitting technology right through to just questioning everything you do and constantly testing and not being too wedded to the idea you had at the time, because the customer's voice should speak the loudest.
Fantastic. Some really important insights there that very much align with our thinking on product management. And over to you, Ed, a brief introduction and your response to that question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Bobeth. Most recently was one of the product EGMs at Xero, the accounting software company. And prior to that, I'm doing product management consulting. And then I worked with Narelle, had the great pleasure of working with Narelle at Telstra before that. I think my only add to what Narelle described there was really around, one of these big shifts has been the ability to collect, data and insights in a much more cost-effective way. When both Narelle and I started our career, it was really hard to get good quality data. You would be able to, how many people came into a store, how many people bought something, and to get under the hood, you'd have to do expensive qualitative research to understand the motivations. But now, particularly with digital products, it's just so much cheaper to set up automated tracking, and that can inform you on an hourly, daily basis of what's happened within your product set. And with access to that information, it's enabled product managers to get much, much closer to what the customer is doing, and when combined with qualitative research or customer interviews, understand the why. And I think that's enabled us to, the competitive forces have pushed us all to understanding that much better, so we can build products that customers love, and we can be much more certain of that as we've kind of rolled out our products and iteratively improved them.
And look, some really important insights there. And I love the sort of the balancing act between the greater access to digital tracking, which occurs, but also the need to probe the why. So often we can understand what's happening, but we don't necessarily know if it's out of convenience because there's no better offers, and that could be a competitive opportunity, versus we're right on the dial, as Narelle and you both mentioned with regard to the role of empathy. Next question, which is very much aligned with this, is some may have heard of the story of Jeff Bezos leaving an empty chair in the room during meetings as a reminder to consider the customer in every discussion. So how do you in your organization maintain a customer-centric approach? Narelle.
I'm going to answer this in a couple of parts, because I think you've kind of got to break it down into, how do you decide what you're going to do? And then how do you make sure what you're doing is kind of heading in the right direction and meeting the customer needs? So at SEG, we use a couple of toolkits. The first one is jobs to be done. So really, jobs to be done is about understanding the specific goals or jobs that people are trying to achieve when they're trying to solve a problem. And they remain pretty stable over time. And I'll talk a little bit about around how we use it at Seek and how we determine what the jobs to be done are. But people kind of hire products to solve problems, and they're either met or they're not met or they're partially met, and our job is to kind of get underneath and determine which ones we think we can solve and solve effectively, whether that's using technology or the platform that we have. And so with jobs to be done, you kind of, when you talk about defining what the customer aims to achieve, I'll give you an example at Seek. We want to help candidates get timely, personalized job discovery so they can find jobs and recommendations, and they want to ensure that they're not missing relevant opportunities that align with their capabilities. So there's kind of functional jobs and there's emotional jobs and there's social jobs to be done. So that's how we think about kind of how we define what we want to do. And so, we've been doing this for a number of years. We do interviews to uncover what those jobs are. And we have a really long history of those interviews, and essentially the jobs largely remain the same, but they might move in and out of priority for people. So in for Seek, in an environment where there's lots of jobs and people aren't finding it hard, the jobs to be done might be slightly different to when there's less jobs and people are finding it harder to find a role. So, but they do tend to remain pretty constant, and we use the jobs to be done to kind of prioritize. And so we design solutions around these jobs to be done and continually validate that those jobs are being met or those solutions are providing answers to the customer's problem. And I think over time, it gets you a very deep understanding of customer motivations. You innovate based on genuine needs from the customer, and it really does promote broad thinking about potential solutions. Now, when you get to the point of putting the customer in the room and having a seat at the table, that's the second part of it. So the first part, the customer kind of comes into the first part as well, but having that seat at the table is, we use a framework called continuous discovery. And it means we spend a lot of time with customers. So we test and retest our ideas, we create prototypes, and whether they're low fidelity, which might just be a wireframe or a mock-up of something, or higher fidelity when we start to build the digital products and we put that into market to sort of 10% of the customer population, we try and test and retest those ideas and work through short development cycles to just regularly get in front of customers and get that input and make sure we're on the right track. So I talked about getting wedded and enamored with your idea. This is how we keep ourselves honest. And it does really help us reduce the risk of building the wrong thing. It does help us actually move faster. And it definitely leads to higher customer satisfaction and more efficient use of the resources, because you are constantly checking that you are building something that matters and solves meaningful jobs to customers. So we combine the jobs to be done and the continuous discovery to help really make sure that we are answering the right problems, but we stay on track with the right problems and we're solving them the right way and effectively.
It's really interesting, Narelle. So you've very much embedded that as part of your product development process.
We have.
And you mentioned prioritization. So clearly over time, there's learnings that if you do it well, you get greater traction. So the product has greater success in the market and you get better feedback. And the framework's rather interesting. So you have developed a tool to enable that to occur. What we're going to do is now we're going to launch an audience poll and get some feedback from the audience as to how does your organization maintain a customer-centric approach. So if you could, on your screen, you'll see multiple choice, choose the most relevant response, and we'll get an idea of from the audience how that's tracking for them. And we'll just allow a little bit more time for members of the viewing, engaging audience out there to make a selection, and then we'll reveal what that spread is, and that will be interesting to get a sense of a sense check on where people see customer centricity in the context of their own organization. Okay, well, that's probably enough time. We can have a look and see what the poll is. That'll be shared. And while we're doing that, let's see, we've got regular feedback surveys, interviews, and focus groups. Well, that's certainly in line with some of the discussion. But customer journey mapping, which is part of the process, prioritizing customer attention. All of the above, probably good to see. And none of the above, I can imagine that that some organizations are probably looking for ways to enhance this, because in a competitive environment, in a user-centric environment or customer-centric environment, it becomes an imperative. So let's move on to the next question then, and this one's for you, Ed. In your role, how do you prioritize feedback and insights to better deliver outcomes for your customers? And I know that aligns with a question I saw coming in from the questions from the listening audience.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And we've talked a lot about how we collect data and insights, and I really just want to reiterate what Narelle was saying with the continuous discovery and just how critical that part of the product manager's role is. It's an expectation now of all product managers that they know how to collect, the quantitative data. They're doing regular focus groups and those sorts of things. But the sort of more informal, the more frequent checking in with customers is in my opinion, one of the most valuable ways of really validating whether you're on the right track or not. And that can feel pretty unnatural for product managers, and depending on your role and the industry or the type of company you operate in, it can be difficult to create those sorts of opportunities. But it's just such a critical one, because that informs much better prioritization that I'll go into in a moment. But I'll start off on saying on prioritization, there is no perfect way to prioritize. There's no scientific formula that can be applied, or at least none that I've seen. And so, I'll run through a few techniques, but a lot of the time it is up to the product manager's judgment, or, with their peers, their broader product team, their judgment to interpret all of the different threads that are sometimes conflicting, to work out what is the next most important thing to do. And I'll also mention that prioritizing your team to work on customer impacting things rarely happens in isolation. It is almost always in the context of having to prioritize against other strategic objectives. There might be a replatforming project that an allocation of effort needs to go on, or bug fixes, or those sorts of things. And so prioritization rarely occurs just on the customer side. It usually occurs, in the broader context of how the work is allocated to the teams. But some of the techniques that I've used, I'll run through those in a moment. I think it's important not to get too bogged down on the techniques. There are lots of great tools that can be used. They should be used as a guide to have a debate, have a discussion, to get to an outcome. And so debate the content much more than the techniques. But some of the ones I've loved using are just pretty simple. Payoff matrix, so, customer benefit or business benefit versus ease of implementation. How easy is it to get the most, bang for buck? The Eisenhower matrix, this is used in lots of different contexts, but importance versus empathy, this can be sort of 2x2 or 3x3. 2x2 for the Eisenhower. That's a great one, used in lots of different ways. Traditional cost benefit analysis, how much is cost, what is the benefit? But in the types of work that product managers do, the certainty on the benefits is often, it can be very variable. It's very rare that the certainty on the benefit side is high. And so you've got to, factor in how risky are some of the assumptions on the benefit side. That's usually the case on the cost side as well. And so they're just a couple of tools that I've used to help prioritize. But the way you use those tools, it's really important not just to do that in isolation. It's really important to have your stakeholders across the business with you as part of that. So whether that's your sales colleagues, your marketing team, you get a much better result going through that prioritization to get the input of others on the ratings and the weight that you assign to those things. And I think last point on this one on prioritization is it always needs to be done with the business objectives or your product mission in mind. Sometimes customers will give you feedback about things that you could do, but you really need to think about, is this in line with the mission of what we are striving to achieve? And it's such an important one to kind of keep that in mind so you don't get sidetracked down a route that, whilst might be important, it's not getting you overall to where you might want to get to.
And that's a great segue into the next question I have. Ed, you did mention about a multi-stakeholder and a shared vision. And for Narelle, this question is really looking at that intersection between business technology and the customer, and how do you encourage this cross-functional collaboration between the various groups, the product management, engineering, design teams, to ensure cohesive customer experience?
It's absolutely critical to a product manager's role that they can bring those groups together, and bringing those groups together really effectively is about having a level of shared ownership in the outcome. I've worked in organizations where product defined the thing that you wanted to create and then told UX to go and design it and told engineering to go and build it. And I've had some successes, but actually probably quite a few failures. And what I see as the world moved to agile work practices and the teams moved to shared accountabilities, that that shared ownership is super valuable. And as a product manager, you kind of need to foster that because you're the one sitting in the middle of it. I love Ken Norton from Google. He wrote a really interesting, I think it was a memo or something like that, back in 2006, so a really long time ago. But he worked in AdWords, Google Maps, Google Docs. So he was like very influential in how product development was done in Google. But he uses this metaphor of the product manager as the glue. And I think it really captures the essence of a PM's multifaceted role. PMs don't often manage people, they manage their product, and their authority is defined from their expertise, their ability to persuade and lead, and it's not a formal hierarchy, which can be really tough sometimes when, you're trying to get all of these different parts of an organization lined up to deliver something. And so, it kind of means that communication is absolutely key, having a really clear vision. And if you can anchor on the customer and what you're trying to achieve for the customer, you can sometimes break down individual agendas. And so it's really important that the product manager is great at communicating and setting a vision and saying, hey, this is where we want to go and this is what we're trying to solve. And they need to be able to communicate and synchronize between those designers, sometimes the marketers, sometimes other stakeholders. And I do think focusing on the customer is pretty centric to that. I think the other thing is product managers often have to play decision maker. So they actually have to make tough calls on scope. They have to kind of navigate when there's differences of opinion with the teams and go, right, you know what? There's all of these different views. How are we going to get to a decision? How are we going to move forward? And that kind of leans to, I think, product managers need to have a bias towards action. Just there is often no right answer in the world of product management. You have to make a judgment call. And I think making progress, measuring that progress, testing, experimenting is absolutely critical to making the right decisions. And I think lastly, while not necessarily proficient in UX or engineering, particularly in tech companies, product managers kind of have to understand a little bit about everybody's jobs to be able to bring it together in the whole. And that's when I kind of come back to the glue. There's stuff you have to be masters of, and then there's stuff that you kind of need to understand and have empathy for to bring the whole team together. But I'll come back to having a clear vision on what you're trying to solve for the customer is really critical to bringing all those cross-functional areas together.
Fantastic. And look, the next question I'm going to jump to here is about trends. So the biggest trends that you see impacting product management jobs. So just maybe like a brief sort of dot point sort of response. What do you see as the as the key trends, Narelle?
I'm going to just talk about one for us at the moment.
Okay.
So, I think, and I'm not. I've lived through the world of, Bitcoin and BitTorrent and those sorts of things, but actually for Seek, it's large language models, and I think things like ChatGPT and GPT-4 are advanced AI systems that train vast amount of text. And if you think about Seek, we are matching humans who express their desire for, so if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody hiring, they express their desire for filling a role with words. And then for a candidate, when they're trying to find a role, they're expressing their interest in a role and their search for a role through words. And so historically, older search technologies have primarily relied on things like keyword word matching. And what ChatGPT is, it just opens up this ability for us to understand context and semantics and nuances in language. And so when we employ them, and we're testing this out at the moment, it's really exciting. We can get much better matching, not just matching keywords, but actually matching with a lot more context. And it's right at the heart of what we do at Seek, in matching what candidates say about themselves to what hires express. And it's pretty exciting for us. So, and you don't see that many technology shifts that are that significant in your lifetime. And for me, this is one of the really big ones, having, lived through, as I said before, 20 years of product management. But just to give you a little bit more context, if you think about the role of a business analyst can mean a whole bunch of different things. It can mean a business analyst who's running a scrum in an engineering team. It can be a financial analyst that works in an accounting team, or it can be a data analyst that does digital analytics. And what large language models would be able to do is look at that person's CV and see the type of work they've done, and be able to actually say, hey, that is this type of business analyst. We're going to match them with this type of role. And then it just also is able to really understand the nuances of a skill. So somebody might write they've done team coordination, and a hirer might write that they're looking for somebody with team leadership. And that really simplifies the ability to just process vast amounts of data and get it much more efficiently in to match candidates and hirers. So I know everybody, I use ChatGPT to summarize customer feedback, and I find that super useful, but I am so excited about what it means for Seek and our ability to do a better job of bringing our customers and hirers together. It's super exciting.
Indeed, and no doubt that'll all change, and there's a role of prompters and what have you, so that the right sorts of biases and interpretations and judgments are being made. I noticed a question came in from somebody but talking about interpretation and judgment, but certainly that is a trend, and a big trend.
Yeah.
What we're going to do now is run a poll, and this poll is again testing to everybody out there who's listening in. So what are the biggest technology trends that you're observing impacting product management jobs? So if we can just have some time to complete that. And whilst the poll is being completed there, what I'll do is jump to the next question. And this one will be for those looking to get into product management, what skill sets do you think, do you see that are mandatory to have to succeed? We might pass this one to you, Ed.
Yeah, sure. So the product manager's job, there's a lot of sort of hard skills that are required. The product manager's job is to design the right product, make sure it's built right, make sure it's launched right, and then managed in market, make sure that's all, going how it should. And within each of those categories, there are lots of skills required. In the designed right part, things like human-centered design, strategy development, discovery practices, they're really important. Launched right, built right, that's all around kind of agile development, project delivery, approaches. critically important. Launched right, that gets into, I think, some of the softer skills around stakeholder management and making sure you bring the whole organisation along. And then, the managed right, how do you continually iterate and cycle through? So they're all critical skills that, is what a product manager will spend a lot of their time doing. But I think it's, how they do it that are some of the most important things that I love to see in, aspiring product managers. And across all of those things, I think probably, the one that I think is most important is around, can the product manager create certainty out of ambiguity? I think that is one of the most critical areas for them, because that, in all of those 4 stages that I spoke about, that is the role that they're trying to do to move the development to the next cycle. So, what market should we attack? What's the right segment? All of these things, answering those questions and bringing the company along to do that. So dealing with ambiguity and creating certainty out of ambiguity is, really one of the critical skills. I think, and with that, having great product judgment, or people call this different thing, product sense, product taste, product judgment, that comes with experience, and using lots of iterative cycles improves, judgment of deciding to do the right thing. And, Narelle touched on this one before, empathy as well. Empathy for the customer, empathy for their peers in moving things through. So they're 3 of the softer skills that are very hard to define, but when you see them done well, that person is going to be a great product manager.
So it's really interesting, isn't it, that although product management is often a build of something that involves technology, what you're really looking in skill set is really about human skills and the ability to really be in line with the customer. So there's this great alignment and a number of processes as skills with capabilities and mindsets that can set people up for that. And just for the final question before going to the audience questions, and I might hear from you here, Narelle. So traditionally, product managers often come from a variety of backgrounds, and not surprising as we move particularly into the digital realm. So for those who may be currently working in a completely different field, looking to get into product management, which we find we get a lot of inquiries from those people looking at our program, what would your advice be?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I think at the time Ed and I started out working in product roles, there was no such thing. Like when you went to look for a role in the external world, it was like a category manager, or in sort of fast-moving consumer goods, or it was a marketing manager, and product management roles were kind of few and far between. And that has changed a lot over the years. And I love the fact that RMIT have a focus on product management in their education, which is why I was super happy to do this today. I think and if I think about my journey, I have an IT degree, so information systems, but I started out as kind of a business analyst. And so I think it's really important for people to remember the path to product management is pretty versatile, and a lot of different disciplines can transition into the role. And it's really important about, having the right skills and mindset that kind of Ed described in his last answer to his question. But I've seen people come from such diverse backgrounds. Technical engineering is really common, business and management, design and UX. In particular domains such as healthcare and finance, they often just come from being deep specialists in their area, which can be super useful. Customer support, we've got a few product managers from our customer support area, and they bring really good customer empathy into the role. Project management, done project management jobs in my past. Entrepreneurs are really interesting, because often they are, the product owner in a startup is the person who is the founder of the business. And so, we do see that. Consulting is a big one. And then I think there's lots of others. But I think it's really about having the core skill sets and the mindset to creatively problem solve, deliver, work with teams, influence. It's all the things Ed described before, but it can come from a bunch of different areas. Ed, what was your background before coming into product? It was an interesting...
Yeah, mine was marketing. I did a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Business with a major in marketing. And I think what I'd just add to Narelle is, if you love diving into the unknown and thinking about what the solution could be to a complex problem, then product is a great field for you. It is. That's the reason I love it so much, is that there's no formula for success. There's lots of trial and error, and then occasionally you'll have a eureka moment where you gather an insight, and then you can turn that into something that customers will love. And so if that's the sort of thing that excites you, I think product management would be a brilliant career. And more practically, for this question about how to get into product management, I think Narelle talked about lots of the great areas you can come from, but one of the, if you're not currently doing a product management role, just getting out and talking to people that are is probably the best place to start. Get out into your network, use LinkedIn, who's doing product, or who's at a company that's an interesting product led company, and start talking to them, and understand the customer behavior of those companies. And I think that there are a couple of good places to start. And then, of course,
it's a good point, Ed. Sorry, I interrupted you. There are some companies that have a similar program to what we have. We have an associate product management program, which is where we hire people from diverse backgrounds. It's different to a grad program because we take people with years of experience who want a career change. And the associate product manager, we're looking for people that we can train on how we want to do product at Seek. And we've got some incredibly talented people in that program. And because they bring experience from elsewhere, it's very rich and very powerful when they move into those jobs. So, and there are other companies that have similar programs from that as that as well.
It's really interesting you say that, Narelle, too. I noticed during the pandemic, Craft were sort of a company that was struggling with being able to acquire enough IT folk, and their CEO sort of wrote an article about how they reached out to older internal staff who were looking at a career transition, and they would train them internally or support their training, and they found they had tremendous success in doing so, because you had committed people with a wealth of experience that could just transition to a different context. And I think really in terms of lifelong learning, there's certainly something to be said there. We might just reveal the result of the previous poll around the trends that we had. So things like data-driven decision making, more efficient AI, which is consistent with what Narelle was talking about. And quite a number, all of the above. So real-time customer feedback, etc., and more agile development processes. So really interesting to get a sense of what's coming through from the broader community listening in. Now, we've had a number of questions. I've been through them, and a lot of them we've actually answered as we've gone through. So I'll see if I can pick something that and this might have been a little bit similar to what was talked about multi-stakeholder, but it's a little bit more about you've got user-centric, but you've also got business-centric objectives. And really, this question is from a co-founder of a company that emphasizes user experience while targeting businesses, as a revenue stream based on your experience. Could you share any insights on the nuances of designing a product that caters for both that user-centric and business-centric objectives?
Yeah, this is such a critical but difficult juggling act for any product manager, for any organization. And Marty Kagan, many of the folks on the call probably have read a bit of Marty's work, and he talks about the fact that things have to be, it has to be viable for the company. It's got to be great for the customer, beautiful for the customer to interact. But the tension point that a product manager always has to weigh up is, how do I ensure that that is also viable for the company? I've, throughout my career, worked on things that I knew customers said they really wanted, and then it's kind of gone out to market, and they said, yeah, that was okay. We've invested all this money, and it's fallen a little bit flat, and so didn't get the sort of take up expected, and so sometimes you get that balancing act a little bit wrong when you over-index on one of those or the other. The flip side is when you index too far onto the commercial value side, and this often happens with pricing and in more mature markets where you think you can eke out a little bit more value by some price changes. And then that has a really detrimental impact to the customer experience as well. And so to the person that asked that question, I wish I had the magic formula for that, but that's part of the fun of product manager, of trying to balance those competing threads.
Another question that came in, which is really interesting, and I think this is always a bit of a challenge. So this is like, what would it be like for a product management team and a customer experience team to either combine into one team or split into two separate teams? And I think this is part of moving towards holistic design by getting inputs, which I know here we're doing it at RMIT from a sort of a marketing perspective, getting all of the team's inputs into the one design challenge, rather than people seeing themselves in particular silos, and there's gatekeepers and all sorts of things traditionally. Any thoughts on that? How do you marry up the various talents and pools of talents and teams and what have you in an organization?
I think this comes back to what we were talking about before. Sorry, everybody, I'm losing my voice a little bit. Around the power of cross-functional teams. It's about kind of lining the customer experience, the product teams and the engineering teams and the analysts and marketing and customer service sort of all up behind a common objective. And the outcome is much richer if you can harness the value of the different components. I think if you ask a product manager to do design, they'll do it. They won't do it very well. And if you ask a designer to do product, it's kind of about focus, like having designers very focused on the customer and the experience and the design, and having the product manager focused on the problem to solve and navigating and bringing all the components together, and having the engineers, like imagine asking an engineer to do product management, that it's about focus. They'd kind of do everything okay, but getting focus on design and product and engineering all happening at the same time is very, very powerful. But bringing that together is the real challenge. So I am very passionate about the individual value of each of the different roles that kind of play a part in bringing a product to market, and recognizing that they bring specialist skills.
And we've just got time for one more question. And I've been through some of the more detailed questions, and I think we've sort of answered aspects of them. But I think one that's really a challenge and a bit of a frustration is this concept of get the team out, do a hackathon for one day, get some engineers involved or whatever. And the question was really pointing out how it can be demotivating, because it's very hard in one day just to sort of solve everything. Whereas I think the temper of the conversation has very much been around process driven. It's embedded. I know you've both spoken about that, but I think that's one of the challenges. You shift into a different domain. What's your thoughts? So Seek has usually every half, I think it's a bit, we're in the middle of a major program at the moment, so we've shifted our timings, but we have hackathons, and they run for 3 days, and they're one of my favorite parts of Seek, because what you see is the power of the passion of people coming together to solve a problem that they're super passionate about. And I think that is where they're really successful, is when you have, all of the disciplines in the room, and have the systems and technology to be able to ship things fast. And Seek's pretty unique compared to other corporates that I've worked that have done hackathons that have been 3 days, 5 days, but they just have no means of getting the customer problem and the product thing into the technology roadmap, because potentially the technology is not designed for quick turnaround. They have large releases and regression testing to get things to market. And so I think there are some companies that have done hackathons as innovation theatre, quite frankly, without setting them up to do what a hackathon is meant to do, which is actually build and ship code in a very short window. And so I think companies need to be really thoughtful about, when they do those sort of hack days, that they are picking off, well, they're set up to do it and achieve it, not just
build kind of interesting ideas that never go anywhere because they can't be prioritized. So I'm pretty passionate about hackathons. I love them because they allow the bottom-up thinking and some great ideas to happen. But if you can't take them to market or ship them, it's pretty demotivating. I agree with whoever wrote that comment.
Fantastic. Look, we've had a wonderful session and some really interesting insights. I'd really like to extend a very heartfelt thank you, Ed and Narelle, for lending us your time, sharing what you're both very passionate about. And I know that. I had a reach out from Ed, and we met and had a deep discussion, and then we connected with Narelle. And I think it's lovely when people have had a wealth of experience and they're very passionate about what they do. Very keen to share and guide others in a growth arena. So fantastic. We really appreciate that. To those people who did ask whether the recording would be available, yes, it will be available and sent to everybody who's registered. So thank you all very much for joining us on the couch with Ed and Narelle. I'm Dr. Kevin Argus from RMIT, as I said, the Program Director of the Graduate Certificate of Program Management. And the team at RMIT Online will take any questions that you have about our program also. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Kevin. Thanks, everybody.